There's so many authors out there that we can learn from, and there's also so many things that they can inspire us that are beyond just their work. Specifically speaking to their discipline and their philosophy on how they approach writing. So we're gonna talk about it all. We're gonna talk about the craft, the philosophy, and their work ethic. These are the authors who inspire me currently and what I have learned from them. We're starting off with Stephen King, and this is specifically because at the time that I'm filming this, Halloween is literally less than a few days away. I chose to read The Shining for my spooky read. I have not read a single book by him before. I've seen the movie The Shining, and the book is 1,000 times creepier. Just from reading one book by him, there are a few things that have stuck out to me, besides the fact that he is excellent at horror. He has very specific characters. No matter how much of a small supporting character, they all have very specific point of views. They all view the world in a very specific way. They have specific mannerisms, tics. Everything is so specific. So besides his craft, I actually looked up his writing routine, not just for this video specifically. I am going to do a Stephen King writing routine video. And while I was doing that research, there were a few things that stuck out to me that I feel are very helpful to a writer. So he talks about kind of two of the reasons why he shows up every day to write. One of them is he feels that there should be optimism around writing, not this nervousness or stress about confronting your page. And in then doing so, he creates writing like a routine. One of the interviews I read, he said, you know, it's like when you go to bed, you have a routine, you brush your teeth, you do all these specific things, and it's just a normal habit. It's nothing out of the ordinary, it doesn't upset you, it doesn't cause distress, it's just something you do every day. I'm not solving the world's problems, I am just writing. So I think that there's something really healthy in there to be said, and then especially if you look at his career, he pumps out books like crazy. He also talked about that one should not sit on a first draft for more than 3 months because then it becomes stale. And I think that's actually a very good point. I know that for many people, their first books can take them a while. Further you progress, it's very true. You can sort of overthink and analyze something way too much. Moving on to Brandon Sanderson. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I have done a few Brandon Sanderson reactions in extensive detail for his Stormlight series, the first 2 books. Because what I've read from his first 2 books, I understand that he is very big into world building. He loves creating very specific magic systems, and he also puts in a lot of maybe questions or wonderings about the world and kind of uses his characters as a way to reflect through them. So those are the kind of things I've gleaned from his writing, but I didn't necessarily know his process. This was from an article that I found online, and someone asked, what do you do in the cases when you're creatively stuck, aside from putting aside the project? Sanderson replied, I don't get creatively stuck to that extent very often. For the average day by day, what people might call writer's block, most of what I do involves writing the scene anyway, writing it poorly basically. I found that 90+% of the time, if I'm having trouble with a scene, if I back up, write it from a different viewpoint, write it completely different in some way, I will fix it. The trick comes in making the leap. What do I change? And usually to do that, I write it the way I was planning to write it, the way that feels wrong to me, and then I let my subconscious work on it, dig at it for a day or two. And almost every time my subconscious will say, here's what you're doing wrong. You need to rethink how this character is approaching the scene. But I can't do that unless I've written it poorly first, which is very odd. I love that answer for how to deal with writer's block, if you will. One of my favorite singer-songwriters, Ed Sheeran, he actually talks about how he is at the studio Monday through Friday in order to get the bad songs out of him so he can eventually find a good song. And he feels that that's just the way it is, you know, it's sort of a process. When you are writing, whatever medium you are writing for, it's like working a muscle. And I think in one interview, Ed Sheeran referred it to kind of as like cleaning out a drain and getting all the gunk out. I think what Sanderson's saying is very true and very helpful, is you need to just write it, because otherwise you have nothing to edit and you can't figure out why in your head it's wrong. That's what we learned from good old Brandon Sanderson. So if you're writing a scene and you don't really like it, just write it so you can actually figure out why it's not working. Sarah J. Maas. If you know anything about my channel, I am obsessed with her. I have covered many books of hers on my channel. I love analyzing her writing. I love trying to pick apart and understand her world. And she, similar to Sanderson, also leaves a lot of Easter eggs in connecting her stories. And I think one of the things that makes Sarah stands out that we can learn from her is that she does not shy away from her subgenre. She loves romance. I think a lot of people don't read her fantasy books, her high fantasy books, for this reason, which bums me out. But I think if you look past the surface level, there's so much deep, rich character growth, not to mention just beautiful nuggets about life that have affected me in very grand emotional ways that I would have never expected. Again, there's so much more going on with her characters and how they're processing their trauma. She deals with mental health in such a unique and special way. Another thing she talked about is that she uses music to write. I think there's something really powerful about hearing music and feeling it in your body and using it as a way to transport you. I don't know how many times I have had scenes come to life in my head from using music. I think that Sarah is a very deep writer and she feels a lot, and we see that in her books. I say don't shy away from the things that you love and just go harder on them. That's what people will be attracted to, is the authenticity. J.R.R. Tolkien. So he is actually the man who got me into fantasy. He said he always made time for writing, and as we know, Professor Tolkien had a very busy schedule. He had lectures, he had classes all day, and he also wanted to make sure he spent time with his family. But he always made time for it. He made sure he spent the mornings writing, and he also carried a little notebook in his pocket, which is what he did his writings with in the morning, but it was with him all day, so in case a thought or idea came up, he could write it in that notebook. Even when he was at war, he was working on his lost tales. And then these were 3 other things that I found on a blog that someone sort of pointed out about what his process is for writing. He started out with maps first. I think a map can also lend as a sort of outline. So you can either use a map or an outline, but I think the whole point of it is that it gives you some groundwork for where your story is. It can help you really envision about where your characters are and where they're going to go. It sounds like for Tolkien, he was much more of a visual person in a lot of his storytelling, and so doing the map helped him visualize where they were going to start in the Shire and end up at Mordor. So this kind of harkens back to what Sanderson said, that to write it in order to fix it. Tolkien apparently was really big on editing drafts. And he would constantly go back, and specifically in Lord of the Rings. I think what I read in The Hobbit is he didn't do that much editing, but with Lord of the Rings, it took him a long time to write it, and that was because he would constantly go back and be editing stuff. There is something methodical about going back on what you've already written and working on it and improving it. So if you're having a day struggling to write something new, then I encourage you just to go back into your world that you have already created in the previous pages and see if there's anything that you actually are like, I don't think this works, but I have an idea. And try that out. And he also talked about in the article I read that he would really allow the story to reveal it to himself rather than trying to like force it out. So the other day when I sat down to write, I was like, I'm gonna be optimistic, like Stephen King said. I'm just gonna write. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't need to be perfect. And my chapter ended up going in a direction I did not expect it to go in. I created a class that I did not ever think would exist at my magic school, but it is literally tied into my magic system. I think it's one of my favorite pieces I've written. Last but not least is Madeline Miller. You might know her. She wrote the Song of Achilles, Circe, and I think she's working on Medusa now. She does retellings of mythology. Basically what I want to share about Madeline Miller, which I think is really important, and that has kind of been the through line for everything I've discussed, is a lot of these authors have talked about showing up every day to write. Madeline Miller has different feelings on that. What's the best piece of writer's advice you've received? As a young person, I read a lot of books about writing, and one piece of advice that popped up often was that if you want to be serious, you should be sitting at a desk 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And the moment you finish something, you should start something else. This made me feel awful about myself because it was completely different from my process. Writing for me is like descending to the bottom of the ocean. It takes me a long time going down and a long time returning to air, and I have significant fallow periods in between. And then I heard Anne Patchett say something along the lines of, sometimes I'm writing and sometimes I'm living, and both are valuable. It was a revelation for me. Discipline is important, but so is taking a breath and looking around and giving things a chance to germinate. And of course, life experience will in the end feed your writing. Thank you, Anne Patchett. So everyone is different, and what I'm learning is that you, myself, we need to find whatever way works for us to show up and write and tell the stories we want to tell and get the book done. You also may have things in life that just happen. And I also agree with the part about life experience. Maybe you're traveling and you're in another country. You could write every single day where you're there, or you could experience that trip the whole time and then come home and write and let that feed you. I don't think there's any wrong or right answer. I think there just needs to be a way for us showing up to write every day that's not scary, it's not stressful, it's not intimidating, but we are working a muscle, we are making it into a routine. Whatever your routine is, that's what works for you. Don't be the tortured artist. We don't need to be tortured artists. Let me know in the comments who inspires you and why. See you in the next video.